healing and comfort, we see all that is wrong and wonder where you are.
We are a broken people, unable to work together for our common good. We cannot see or hear each other, even within our own families and communities.
We are a suffering world. Our nations are filled with conflict and violence. The fragile earth cries out with longing for redemption.
We, God's people, long for God's presence, saying with the prophet, if only you would dare open the heavens and come down.
On the first Sunday of Advent, we light this candle to remind us of our longing, that God will come into the world, bringing justice and peace, comfort and healing.
Our scripture lesson this morning is from Isaiah 9, chapters 1 through 7. The people who walk in darkness have seen a great light. Those who live in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as the joy of the harvest, as people exult when dividing the plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the trampling warriors, all the garments rolled into blood, shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace on the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
I was 9 years old when I found out that my biggest wish in the whole wide world was going to come true. I had asked and begged my parents a lot, who just happened to be here, so they can confirm this later if need be. I had wished and dreamed and prayed for this: a baby brother or sister. Although it was scientifically possible to find out whether this much anticipated and expected baby would be a boy or a girl, my parents didn't want to know. They wanted it to be a surprise. And of course, 9-year-old me really wanted to know. But alas, we waited. I still remember that as people do, they would comment on my mom's belly when we were out in public, right? They'd ask what the baby was, and given that the response was always, it's going to be a surprise, they would then give their predictions as to what the baby would be. And I remember that a high percentage of the comments indicated that this baby would be a boy. Apparently the shape of the belly, right, how high it was or low, or the direction it was pointing specifically, all were boy. It's what we were told in grocery stores and checkout lines all throughout Highlands County. But we still had to wait. Though I was beginning to be convinced that maybe it is a boy, right? Like, all of that they're saying makes sense. But we still had to wait and wait and wait. Even in the hospital, I remember waiting. And I remember waiting for my dad to come out, and so my grandma, Aunt, and I were in the waiting in the aptly named waiting room. And he came out and he was overcome with joy. And I, of course, quickly asked, my first question was, what is it, right? What is the baby? And he didn't tell me. He said he was going to wait until my mom told me, until they were all together. More waiting. How much can an overly excited 9-year-old wait? But alas, I waited. Was led to the room, and finally the moment came. What is it? And it was not what I was expecting. It was not a boy. But nonetheless, wow, it was a sister. And honestly, I did not experience an ounce of disappointment. I was just as overjoyed the fact that it was a girl. My joy was complete and truly more so than I could have ever imagined, right? I have a sister, I'm a big sister, right? We're friends forever. In seasons, of course, right? This waiting was well worth the wait, and it was greater than what I had expected. So that is the story of a good expectation. Expecting things are not always good, however. In fact, one of the biggest conversations that I have with people in counseling is where there's conflict between persons. It's often related to people's expectations of each other. Our expectations are often skewed. They often have to do with our wanting to control a situation or a person. I mean, we humans like control. It makes us feel safe, I suppose. And we want a spouse or a roommate or a friend who gives us exactly what we expect, who thinks and reacts and responds how we want them to. And when that doesn't happen, sometimes persons wonder if that person is worthy of being in their life. Or the relationship is filled with continual hurt and disappointment because the expectations that were placed, usually unbeknownst to the other person, were not completed. And as I was thinking of this idea of expectations and our challenges with relationships, I realized that whether we like to admit it or not, we also, in addition to controlling things and people, we like the God that we can control as well. One who we tell what to believe. One who we like to tell who to like, what to do, how to heal, when to do things exactly. And sometimes when this God doesn't live up to our expectations, we get bent out of shape. I was reflecting and I realized that throughout my life, whenever I had gotten most upset with God or felt hurt by God, it's because God did not fulfill my expectations. God didn't right or wrong when and how I wanted it to happen. God didn't heal a person how and when I wanted it to happen. God didn't act like I wanted God to act when I wanted God to act. Thankfully, though we get bent out of shape, God's not been out of shape by my sense of broken expectations or whatever feeling results in that. But God knows that God is not about fulfilling our tiny, narrow expectations, but about turning them and the world and the way that things are, the things that we can imagine, upside down. God is about great reversals. Since Scripture is filled with people like you and me, we see broken expectations all throughout it, and particularly related to Jesus. I had to wait less than 9 months between when I found out that my mom was pregnant and when I got to meet my sister. Israel, at the point where what we call the New Testament begins, so we look at Matthew, right, or even just the earliest, which might be Mark, when that begins, had waited, it is traditionally thought, 400 years since the end of the Old Testament. There's a 400-year period where there is nothing between Malachi and when we begin, when John the Baptist appears. 400 years of waiting and of hearing nothing. It's safe to say that in 400-year plus, Israel had, and still has, some great expectations. At the point where Jesus was born and grew into a man and began his ministry, we lived on earth. This God made flesh, our God who saves with us, as us, this Jesus. Many believed that the promised Messiah who would come and redeem Israel, who would come and save them, would look a certain kind of way, behave a certain kind of way, and most importantly, do some very specific kind of things when he got to them. This Messiah, for one, would immediately make things right, just get there and fix it. Would give the Jews the reign of the land, essentially, and be about their business. This God would be just, of course, but probably in favor of them. This king would free them from those that oppressed them at that moment when he came, and he would do so like a conquering warrior, as a king comes and conquers a land. But Isaiah, a prophet from times before Jesus, in the passage that we read today, was pointing toward more what it looks like for us to wait for. Painted a picture of what our expectations should actually be. And it begins with a people who'd been walking in darkness upon darkness upon darkness. And with a promise that darkness would no longer envelop them. Israel had had its fair share of dark times, even then. They are no strangers to oppressive, bully rulers. They are no strangers to loss, to death, to unexpected challenges. And I would say we are no stranger to any of those things either. Many of their issues often had to do with the fact that they lost focus on God and did their own thing, and it was kind of their own doing at times. But sometimes it wasn't. And that's how it is for life, right? Sometimes we have consequences to our actions, and sometimes life just simply is broken. The expectations from Isaiah, however, acknowledge the brokenness, acknowledge where the people were, and point to a greater realization. This picture in Isaiah points to a kingdom established by who we now trust to be Christ. A kingdom of righteousness and justice and peace for all people who had been walking in darkness. I mentioned to the children that there are these several descriptors that we've heard. I mean, even Charlie Brown has this scripture read. So this is a really well-heard scripture. And we can sometimes kind of get used to it and think of, it doesn't strike us in new ways, but it struck me in a new way specifically. One of the titles, one of the royal titles given to this ruler that we can and should expect, we see at least, one is related to peace. Prince of Peace. And that his government would be one ruled by peace. Peace we often think of, when it comes to governments, probably as a lack of war, right? When there's peace means people aren't fighting or killing each other. But this commentary broadens us It makes us realize that peace encompasses well-being, safety, plenty, along with good relationship with one's brothers and sisters, neighbor, and God. That's the picture that Isaiah paints for us. A picture of community where no one is needing. A picture of community where our relationships with God and each other are right. A God who is present and with us. This peaceable kingdom is one that is proclaimed in the wilderness by John the Baptist. And one that we today in 2017, almost 2018, we in this room in Tice, Florida, that we are called to join God into bringing about. Into serving and striving and sacrificing for this picture of this kingdom that is what we are called to expect from God. Even and especially when we find ourselves in darkness. Like most of Scripture, this isn't kind of a fluffy visual. This language is not just wishful thinking, but it's a confession that has been repeated since the time of Isaiah and still now, of who Israel, of who Christians believe our God to be, and what God calls us to. Is that what we're expecting from God, I wonder? We are called to be expectant during all of Advent as we wait the birth of Christ that we celebrate, but also as we wait the second coming. And as I've been looking at this word of expectation and thinking of expecting and thinking of this idea of waiting, which we don't like to do because we would much prefer to know the sex of the baby, we would much prefer to go through the drive-thru, we would much prefer to have things simplified and quick. Advent tells us to slow down and to prepare for expectations that are greater than we could have imagined. And to prepare and align ourselves with the pictures of Isaiah and not with the pictures of the world or the pictures of our upbringing or the pictures of what makes us comfortable in our own lives. And so today, as we expect, I invite you to sit and wonder today and in the weeks to come what God might want to reveal to you this season. I want you to turn to the person next to you and tell them, I am expecting God to show himself to me this Advent. I am expecting God to show himself to me this Advent. Can you do that? Part of the reason that we wait and celebrate Advent, that we wait the birth of Christ, which I'm pretty sure already happened, right? It's kind of weird. We're like expecting Jesus to be born when we know it already happened. Is that we must have Christ born afresh every year. And what that means for us every year is different. I hope that Jesus' birth means something different to you than it meant maybe 30 years ago. Because if not, I would wonder if that God that you've been thinking of is smaller than the God who exceeds our expectations. Who are we expecting? What are we expecting? I invite us to be surprised by Jesus, to expect to be surprised, to expect good things for all people, not just for ourselves, to expect the unexpected, and to expect to be surprised afresh by Jesus being born and changing us, changing our community, changing our country, and changing our world. That is who I'm expecting this Advent. Thanks be to God. Let us pray.